Now, let me read out a tweet to you. This was sent in the last hour, and it reads, honestly, as we approach June and July and large numbers of people are due to be offered a first dose of the vaccine, isn't it time we considered decommissioning NEFIT? That was sent by Paul McAuliffe, the Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin North West. He joins me now on the line. Paul, you think it's time to get rid of them?
Well, not disband them, but decommission some of the tools that we've been using over the last 12 to 14 months.
What does that mean?
Well, look, I have been very COVID cautious from the very beginning, and I've supported the sort of middle road that we have we followed. Sometimes that means you get criticism from both sides, the COVID zero zealots, but equally those people who wanted to put the economy first. But my disappointment with these guidelines that have been issued today is that I don't believe that they reflect the vaccine bonus or the vaccine dividend that most of us expected when we got to large numbers of the population.
So, this is the Failte Ireland guidelines with time limits for being indoors and the numbers and 6 people around a table once they're over the age of 13.
Kieran, if I tried to explain them to you, right, you would need a PhD before you would go and plan a lunch. And if you've got small kids, it gets even more.
Are they that complicated?
I think they are, but the thing is that they're very similar to those that we used last year.
6 people at a table for an hour and 45 minutes, and you can stay longer if the tables are 2 meters apart as opposed to 1 meter apart.
And 15 if you have children under 13. Incredibly complex when you have essentially different rules for different tables at different distances with different types of people at each table, Kieran.
That's kind of exaggerating it, Paul, isn't it? I mean, I think the time limit is utterly bonkers, but it's not that complicated.
But I think it is, Kieran. Can I tell you, look, as I say, I have been COVID cautious all the way through. I was a big supporter of mandatory hotel quarantining, and I really feel that we risk losing the room here if we try and micromanage the interactions which people who are largely vaccinated have this summer. What we want is to concentrate on the important messages that we need to continue to reiterate. And, there's a lot of good things in here. The idea of not serving at bars, not allowing dancing. I can understand those. But, the idea of not allowing music, the idea of having different time limits for tables of different distances, the idea of having children under 13 and over 13, I just don't see how it's practical for a business owner or for families planning outings to be able to follow all of those. And we know what will happen. They won't follow them. They'll be largely ignored. And I don't want to see that. I want to see the role of NEFIT, and NEFIT have a really important role. I want to see that maintained. But to do that, we need to decommission some of the tools we've used during this pandemic. So
your preference is less rules and regulations going forward and more advice about the best way to act. Is that it?
Absolutely. We don't believe binge drinking is an appropriate public health activity, but we equally don't regulate the number of drinks a bar will sell a person. And I think we need to be moving to that idea of broad guidelines, focusing on important issues like international variants or localized increases of infections where there isn't, for example, uptake of the vaccination program.
Yeah.
They're the kind of areas we need to concentrate on. And my fear is that by essentially ensuring that restaurant owners have to walk around with both a ruler and a stopwatch, that we're actually missing the really important issue here.
Do you think many of them will, Paul? Is your expectation that once these guidelines kick in, that actually a lot of restaurant owners and bar owners will make up their own rules to a degree, and they'll do what you're suggesting that they do, and it's kind of just follow their own gut instinct about what's good advice?
That is my fear, but it's also my fear that with the 11:30 time limit, that we're going to get into this business now of multiple bookings. And that happens. We know that happened before Christmas. And to me, that just increases people's activity and people's movements. It doesn't make sense. And we have to remember, we're on an island. We do have 2 different jurisdictions. It challenges us all the way through. But the guidelines in the north for the same level of vaccination in the population are very different. And I suppose we have to ask the question, why do we have different rules for groups of people that have a similar level of vaccination?
Why do you think that is? Have we suddenly become too cautious?
Well, look, and I'm saying this to you as I repeat, Kieran, I have been COVID cautious all the way through.
No, I appreciate it.
Because I believe in public health. Public health is really important. But to do that, you need to bring people with you. We've never had to resort to the European model where people had to apply for a license to leave their home in the very early stage of lockdown. We brought people with them all the way through. And my fear is that we're going to lose people. But we're also going to have a lot of young people who may not yet have been vaccinated. And they will be asking themselves the question about all of these guidelines when all of the vulnerable and older people in their families have been vaccinated. Why is that being applied?
And of course, those young people who haven't been vaccinated are the ones most likely to go from one pub to another pub to another pub after an hour and 45 minutes.
And what we need to do is make sure that they're not congregating on dance floors or they're not gathering at bars, because we know that would be bad.
Yeah, well,
right? But that shouldn't mean then we don't have sensible rules about people sitting at tables for a period of time that's reasonable. 105 minutes isn't reasonable, and it's just going to, I believe, lead to a lack of adherence to guidelines rather than any sort of increase.
Paul McAuliffe, Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin Northwest. Paul, thanks for joining us here on The Hard Shoulder. 53106, if you've got a view on those Fáilte guidelines or this idea that we need to not necessarily disband NPHET but decommission NPHET, maybe defang NPHET, as Paul suggests. Get your views into me now.